This video is on integers. So let's start by talking about the difference between whole numbers and integers. Now, whole numbers are the numbers you've been working with up until this point in math. They're all the positive numbers, 0, 1, 2, 3, etc. They don't include decimals or fractions, though. So whole numbers are only exactly what they're saying, those whole numbers. Now, integers actually includes all those whole numbers. They are also considered integers. But integers also includes negatives. So integers are all whole numbers as well as their opposites. They still don't include decimals and fractions, but the biggest common mistake is that people think integers are only negative numbers when really they're both the positive and the negative numbers all together. Alright, so in the definition of integers, I mentioned opposites, whole numbers and their opposites. So let's talk about what opposite numbers are. It seems fairly obvious. So if we were talking about -4, if I were to ask you what's the opposite of -4, you would most likely say 4, and you'd be correct. So opposite numbers are just two numbers that are the same distance from 0, just in opposite directions, and they have opposite signs. One of them's positive, one of them's negative. Okay, so if I asked you what's the opposite of 6, you would tell me -6. If I were to tell you the opposite of 1, you would tell me -1. If I asked for the opposite of -3, you would tell me 3. I think you get the idea. Now, the technical definition of opposite numbers is two numbers that have the same absolute value. So what is absolute value? Absolute value is how far a number is from 0. Now, it's a distance, and that means it will always be positive. You never talk about distance in negative amounts. You never say, I'm going to drive -300 miles. You say, maybe I'm going to drive 300 miles east or west or north. Okay. So let's look at some examples of absolute value. Now, this is how absolute value is asked. They have these little bars around the number. So that is asking the absolute value of 3. Now, if you look on the number line, or if you just think in your head, 3 is 3 spaces away from 0 on the number line. So the absolute value of 3 is 3. Pretty simple. The biggest mistake people make is mixing up opposite numbers and absolute value. Remember, opposite numbers, you're always switching whatever the sign is. If you're talking about +4, the opposite is -4. If you're talking about -3, the opposite is 3. Well, in absolute value, your answer is always positive. You will never have a negative answer for absolute value. So let's try another one. This time we have the absolute value of -3. And again, -3 is also 3 spaces away from 0. 3 and -3 are opposite numbers. They're the same distance from 0, so they're going to have that same absolute value. The absolute value of 17 would be 17. It's 17 spaces away from 0. Just like -17 would also have an absolute value of 17. It's just 17 spaces to the left of 0 in the negative direction. And the absolute value of 0, well, you might have guessed, is 0. 0 is 0 spaces away from 0. All right, so let's practice some more absolute value. I want you to fill in the blank with either a less than, greater than, or equal sign. Now, I want you to write out the whole problem in your notes, not just the answer. That won't do you much good when you go back to look at your notes later. Go ahead and pause this and fill in your answers, and then hit play to get the correct answers. All right, so let's start with number 1. Number 1, the absolute value of -9 is greater than the absolute value of 6. Absolute value of -9 is going to be 9. Absolute value of 6 is 6, so 9 is greater than 6. Number 2, those two are equal. They both are going to have an absolute value of 24. They're 24 spaces away from 0, just in opposite directions. Number 3, hopefully you didn't get tricked, because that -8 does not have absolute value bars around it. So I'm not asking what is the absolute value of -8. That's just -8, which is smaller than the absolute value of -2, which is 2. Number 4, the absolute value of -9, which is 9, is greater than -9 because it's a positive compared to a negative. Positives are always greater than negatives. Number 5, 0 is greater than -88. Neither of those have absolute value bars. We weren't even talking about absolute value here. just 0 is greater than any negative. And number 6, the absolute value of negative 14, which is 14, is greater than 0. All right, I'm going to read this word problem. I want you to pause it and work it out in your notes, and we'll go over it in class together. So Sally ate 4/5 of her Halloween candy in one night. If she had collected 120 pieces of candy, how much did she eat?